Hello and welcome to the second in the series of videos looking at how to use methods within Java. Again, particularly aimed at beginner programmers. This will be taking up where we left behind on the first video, methods 1, and what I will be doing is elaborating on that program and staying within that program and kind of elaborating on some of the concepts of methods. As you can see, the code that we have here at the moment in our public class methods intro, you can see that we have got one method there called add, declared there on line 10. It brings in two integers, int a and int b, and it adds them, stores the result as c, prints out c, but then it returns c back to the point of invocation at line 5. In other words, at line 5, the method called add is called, and whatever result that method does is written into the integer called z, and that's printed out on line 6. Now, there is nothing at all to stop you from putting in as much methods or anything as you want within a program, but obviously the main important point is where do you put in the methods. First things first, obviously, is that you can see here that the method here that I've got add is between end of main and the bracket end of class. So typically you will place your methods in, if it was only in one class, you would place it between the bracket between the bracket signaling the end of the main function and also the bracket signaling the end of the class function. So what I'm going to do now is just write an even simpler method, and in doing so I will also reiterate a few of the points that I covered last week in this example. So the first thing that I have to do is watch out for the access level. Now, because I am using the one program all the time, this should not be really a consideration. And what I will do to prove that is just set this method to being private. Okay, now again, the second modifier that we will use, excuse me, is static, just for the moment, because we're not creating objects or our own specific instances. In later videos, when I will be showing you how to create your own object classes and so forth like that, we will be getting rid of the use of the word static, but for now, leave it. Okay? The third parameter is your return type. In other words, are we going to return something from this method? Now, we can do two or three things in this. Is that if we are going to return nothing, in other words, if we are just going to put values into a method, do something with those values, and not necessarily transfer the resulting value back to where we called the method from, we can just write void. That means nothing is being returned to the actual point of invocation. And what I'm going to do is leave it void for the moment, but then subtract. We're just going to write a simple one called subtract, int a, int b. Now, I could have called both of those. Int a, I could have called it donkey, and I could have called int b Janet. Okay, it doesn't really matter. And in fact, the int a on line 16 has no bearing on the int a on line 10. They are both local to their specific methods. So what I will just do now here is just do a simple program just to show that working. Okay, so all I'm just going to do is SOUT and just subtract one from the other, a minus b. Okay, so I have got that method there, and what I am going to do now is invoke that method on line 7. So, noticing a few things. On line 16, I have a method called subtract. it does not return any value. It takes in two values, int A and int B, and then it subtracts them. It subtracts B from A. Okay, so what I'll do here is this: subtract A, B. Okay, so sorry, my mistake there. It's not A and B, it's X and Y. Okay, have to show a few mistakes. Even I do make mistakes. Okay, now there are a few other things that I should be doing also as well in this, which I'll come to in a few seconds time. But on line 7, that will invoke the subtract method. So what I will do is actually run that, and then I'll make a few modifications just to show a few things later. Okay, so clean and build. Build that. And run it. Right, I should have probably put in a better one there, but if you look here, public subtract A minus B. A's value is 16, or sorry, what X values is 16, Y's value is 15, and you can see there on line 7, subtract XY, so you're subtracting 15 from 16, and there on that line there gives you 1. Just to prove what that is, I am going to show one small aside. Supposing you wanted to make sure, supposing you're writing your code and you don't want some code to affect your running of your code, what you can do obviously is comment it out. So if I comment out line 5, it will comment out any calling of line add, so I will only be able to see what's actually happening for the subtract method. So in order to do that, is that if you click on wherever you are, line that you want commented out, and then click on this symbol here, comment, and it will comment out that in that line there. So that it's not getting rid of the line, but it's just basically saying that I don't want to use that line anymore for the moment. So if I run that now, you can see obviously we've still got a problem there of obviously line 6. So what I should have done really was block comment out both lines in 5 and 6, so that I'm only calling the subtract method. Now you might say to yourself, oh, this is lack of professionalism on my behalf, but it's just to show that even professionals make mistakes. Okay, so if I run that again, and I just make sure of one thing here, is just to show in subtract method. Okay, so if I run this again, what it will do is that it will go into here, int x is equal to 16, y is 15, z is 0. Now we don't need z anymore because it's not really reflective, but what will happen is on line 7, subtract x minus y. So x being 16, y being 15, it will come down here, it will print out in subtract method, and then it will print out the result of a minus b. So if I run that, in subtract method 1. Okay, so therefore then that's an important point, that basically it shows that basically that we can call that method. Now obviously if we wanted to return a value, we can. Now there is one important point about return values. Unfortunately, in any method in Java, you can only return one item. Only one item. Okay, so on line 10 there we've got public static int add and so forth like that. We're only returning one integer, in other words the result of a and b. Okay, but however there is nothing at all to stop you from returning any type of one object. In other words, it could be an array, it could be an array list, it could be an object that you create, but so long as it's one atomic object, it is perfectly viable to do. Okay, so what I will do now is that in the next video is this cover the whole topic, a very important topic that is known as overloading. Okay, it's the means of where you can have various methods with the same name and obviously doing different things. It's an important notion that we will need when we are going to be building classes. So up until that point, we'll talk to you and keep on practicing. What I would suggest is also too is just one last thing is here is that do mark out. I've made huge mistakes here. Is that mark out the end, the starting point and the end point of some of your more important methods. Okay, end of add method, end of subtract method. Now, the reason why you might say that now at this point in time, but Eugene, there's only 21 lines there. Why would I want to do that? You must remember that your code is going to get exponentially larger, so obviously you need to get into the habit of commenting your code very, very quick, very, very fast, and it will become second nature. Okay, so until the next time, we'll talk again.